Hello and welcome to a special episode of FinTech Focus TV with me, Toby. We are here at Vintners Place in London, and I'm delighted to have an all-star cast here speaking all things AI, one of the hottest topics in capital markets at the moment. Rebecca, Dan, Paul, Andy, great to have you on board. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for inviting us.
So let's start with a few intros. Rebecca, everyone's been on the show before, so I'm sure that everyone who's avid watchers will remember every episode in detail. But before we kick off, let's just recap for those who haven't watched it before. Rebecca, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm a freelance consultant, and I'm very interested in the impact of AI on the future of our industry.
I think it's going to have a fair impact by the looks of it. And Dan?
Yep, Dan Shepherd, CEO of Baton, which is an AI-driven algo wheel transformation technology company.
Fantastic. Paul?
Paul Brennan, Chief Strategy Officer at Imandra. I was introduced to symbolic AI maybe 2017. I was a customer of it for a long time. It changed my role, and then 3 years ago I took the plunge and joined the firm.
Love it. It's like the Victor Kiam school of thought that, isn't it, as well?
And I'm the founder CEO of Sigma AI. We're a real-time financial market analytics firm.
Fantastic. So I'm really excited to have you all here. Why we're here and why we're doing this is I was on the outside looking in. I was just back from New York and missed you guys by about a week or two when Dan, you brought everyone together in New York to talk all things Baton over there and also have this roundtable about AI. I looked at some of the commentary that was coming through and it looked like a conversation I had to share on the show. So I'm really pleased that we managed to get you all together over here in London, and sorry I couldn't make it out there to New York. But tell us a little bit about your thinking first and foremost, about why you brought everyone together, how everyone fits together, and some of the highlights from that show.
Yeah, great. So yeah, obviously it was a launch in the US of A event for our company, Baton. But we thought we'd add, rather than just have the usual kind of networking event, we thought we'd bring something a little bit more to the table. Had a roundtable event, got all these amazing people as participants. We're trying to work together as well because it's all about collaboration. Yeah. AI in essence is about collaboration as well in terms of data sets and so on. And actually as a small company and sort of various small companies, if we can work together to get the benefits of a bigger, higher scale company, but without having to, compromise our agility and speed, then I thought it would be a really great marriage of skill sets and technologies.
I think that marriage of skill sets and technologies is fundamental to this whole piece and how it all works together. So New York is something which you mentioned is where you were launching the US of A launch for the business. You guys all went out there. There seems to be a lot more. There's a lot of interest, a lot of hype out there. We've got a sort of arms race across the world at the moment to some extent with how and who can get the advantages with AI. Rebecca, what are we seeing on that front at the moment?
Well, I was going to say, I think this was the most interesting takeaway from me when we went to New York, was actually because that was a couple of months ago now.
It was.
The speed of innovation that's happening is that actually it's all incumbent on all of us in the industry to actually learn as much as we possibly can, because yes, there's an arms race, but I think there's different areas of expertise that are emerging. And actually what we're starting to see now is we're moving the conversation on from where we were in New York and the things we discussed around the table we're now having different conversations that are much more use case based scenario and it's changing the debate from, what is this thing that's AI, to actually how can AI solve the problems that I've got today?
Yeah. I'd like to just add a couple of things to both of those points actually, because Rebecca's right. Even in the last couple of months, we've seen new developments explode onto the market. We've seen DeepSeek suddenly arrive, and new techniques are being looked at all the time. But Dan's point about collaboration is really fascinating for me as a founder of a business, and I'm sure for both Paul and Dan the same. And Rebecca runs her own business as well. That collaboration point for a small business is about confidence. Not just sharing problems about AI, sharing problems about growing a business actually is really quite powerful. Mm. Sharing challenges around customers and customer acquisition and how we onboard people, that's also really, really beneficial in the conversations that we've been having. And we're not competing, so actually being able to say, oh, Dan, you might want to talk to this guy or this person over here. And then obviously the one about innovation and technology is key. We're not competing, and things are moving, as Rebecca says, they are moving very quickly. And so being able to share those challenges about, well, should we look at this agentic, or should we look at this in this particular way, sharing those pitfalls and perils is actually really beneficial as well, and helps us compete on a global stage where normally the big firms we're talking to would only ever talk to other big firms, and actually being able to get across the threshold needs that collaboration.
Yeah, that's another thing that technology has changed. It's small companies can compete now, again, with the digital assistants that we all have now and we're getting more used to, and having these kind of complementary skill sets rather than competition based. Yeah,
it's actually a fundamental cultural change in the industry.
Yeah, I agree.
Like we've seen it over the years, obviously with Fix, as sort of like, you know, everybody comes into the room, you leave your hat at the door, that kind of thing. But actually it is growing all the time. And it was interesting, there was, the SEC had a webinar on AI last week, and that was one of the takeaways, was actually the industry has got to get better at sharing data and sharing information in a way that, you know, we all held our cards very close to our chest historically. Yeah. And that's not going to help us compete in the technology race.
So let me put a question on that, because I think it's really interesting, because you're right, over the last few years we've definitely seen this sort of enterprise technology piece. One big company, that's where the risk is coming from. There's been an appetite to sort of trial more. I think with the advance of technology, you have to bring in various bits and pieces. The issue for small companies within this space, this sector, has always been, you know, procurement and the difficulties of getting into that. And it feels to me that there's a bit of a shift now to say it's still difficult for obvious reasons to get into some of the larger companies, but there are ways of doing that and combining and collaborating to make that sort of risk spread a little bit. How do companies get around that?
Distribution deals for me, 100% distribution deals. Work with somebody who is already engaged with one of the tier one banks, rather than trying to headlong try and get through PSLs and compliance and risk and balance sheet assessments. We know we can talk through this collaboration process to distribution deals, and we're already thinking that way and already having conversations with people who have moved from the concept of having to have on-premises style technology to cloud-based technology, and are able also right now to be able to deliver their services into the tier ones. The tier ones, funnily enough, we'll call them just generically tier ones, they do want to have advanced services and do know that actually they are constrained at competing because of those preferred supplier lists and compliance checks and balance sheet checks and so on. They desperately want to actually engage somebody, but no, they can't. So they want to look for somebody that can help with distribution deals as well. So in actual fact, if we collaborate and actually look for those distribution opportunities, we'll be in through the door, I think, in tier ones faster than we would have been otherwise. And there's also ways of selling services, like don't just try and sell an enterprise level, go in small first and make sure that you get adopted and then grow from there. But distribution deals for me.
Yeah, I strongly agree as well. We're doing the same thing. It's we're an API first company, so we can plug into the existing infrastructure which is already there. So we're joining the dots between all the different various technology that's already in place, because obviously some of those, it's a 5-year cycle. They're not going to renew my EMS, my OMS on a daily basis. So having an API first service is great, and then it's kind of B2B2B as opposed to B2B. Exactly.
So frankly, some of the hyperscalers with their app stores or marketplaces where your app or plugin extension widget is part of their ecosystem, it's a better customer experience as well. Yeah. You know, we have extensions with one of the developer environments, and it just means developers who use that environment don't have to jump through extra hoops. So it really helps. Yeah,
it's a model we've seen before in our personal usage of technology, and it works well. We know that,
and it works better now than ever before because of the advanced engineering we're able to deploy. It wouldn't have worked even 5 years ago, where everybody is saying, I'm afraid your technology needs to be installed in this environment. Even if it was a cloud environment, an Amazon Web Services cloud environment or a Google or an Azure cloud environment 5 or 6 years ago would have taken months to redeploy, so that in effect it was now in the cloud environment, whether it's a virtual private cloud environment or not, for the customer. Now, with infrastructure as code, or with the new technology we're deploying around microservices, we can get a tunnel in through our distribution partner to the tier one in, literally in days. I mean, normally by checking and doing all the tests within weeks, but nowhere near the months it used to take.
Yeah. There's an interesting concept, though, going back to what you were talking about originally, and to Dan's point about the OMS and the EMS. So technology is always underpinned for the last couple of decades in terms of the automation of the workflow. But this is different because you're not just talking about execution, you're talking about the whole workflow process. So you can't sit and wait for an OMS to have best of breed in everything, because that's just not possible anymore. And so it's how do you actually plug and play? And this is why things like FTC3, nobody had heard of it a year ago. Now it's sort of like it's becoming part and parcel of the conversation in terms of the new protocols and ways of thinking. And I'm actually doing a research piece at the moment on connectivity in the age of AI. And it's surprising what people are looking for in terms of what they need. Yeah. And how they're recognizing that technology isn't just something that supports your workflow. It's actually a strategic asset that you have in your organization to be able to improve what you do. Yeah,
and I think that sort of feeds into this whole concept of the speed of adoption and change within this sort of space. You can't have something there that this is how we're going to be for the next 2 years, because there isn't going to be progress. You guys have just spoken about 2 months ago, let alone 2 years ago, about what you've been saying, and there's already innovation in what's happening and where it's going and what's.
I think that's why some of the bigger companies are adopting more of an open ecosystem so that they can adapt and move quickly.
Yeah, and that comes through to the innovation and working with people and labs and investment and all that sort of thing. Similar to when we saw, I guess, the tier ones all opening incubators a little while ago. It's the same sort of thing, isn't it? How can we innovate? How can we help? How can we support? And then create that ecosystem.
The other thing as well, Toby, is that this is an AI discussion. So this conversation about AI is misused so often in the way that people define what AI is. But let's go straight to the nub of the point around what's got people excited. It's large language models. When OpenAI came out with ChatGPT, everybody suddenly realized there was this human-like, we'll call it, concept of a large language model that could be deployed. Immediately, the major banks, the tier one firms, said you cannot have that on premises. We can't allow that to be deployed. I know anecdotally of firms that said, well, we'll build our own. So they spent millions of pounds building a large language model, only to find ChatGPT-4 came out and blew them away. Yeah. And all of the employees, because businesses are run by people, said, yeah, but the one that we've just built is rubbish. We want to use ChatGPT-4. Yes. And the compliance structures are not in place to allow you to do that. Now, 2 months or even 3 months ago, that would have been the end of the conversation. But even in that time, we're now exploring small language models. We're exploring how Claude Haiku could be used rather than an open source version can be deployed in our environment for people. So there's ways and means of now looking at artificial intelligence, large language models in a way that we wouldn't have looked at 3-4 months ago.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a cultural change. Yeah.
Massive cultural change.
There's a shift for sure, isn't there, around what we're doing.
And those firms that, by the way, those firms that don't, we're talking about productivity here, those firms that don't embrace it, those firms that don't embrace the probabilistic attitude or capabilities of large language models to be like a human will miss out on massive scale of productivity.
Well, this is the fear and the race that sort of comes into it. Everyone wants to be on the inside. No one wants to be left behind, and that means that you've got to think about, where you are on the journey. We've had a year and a half or so of everyone talking about AI, a bit of posturing, a lot of talk about what does that actually mean, people claiming various bits and pieces, but the hype cycle. Then we move into the fear of, oh my God, what's going to happen? Is my job going to be safe, et cetera, et cetera. Then we move into, how do I actually start doing stuff with this, and what does that look like? So, Paul, if we're looking at that and saying, you're there and you're thinking about your AI journey, as everyone has to, right now who's in this space, what's your sort of game plan for how people get their heads around that?
This hype cycle we've spoken about, and people started going on to ChatGPT and asking it questions, and it's cool.
Yeah.
And then some
Making
of these
some cool
reasoning
pictures.
models that now show you where they access the information from in the web. That's great. But the transformational promise that's been hyped about in the news, research reports, and so on, comes from the practical application of AI. So what we're really talking about is how is this transformational large language model being applied in a setting to do something useful? And what came about towards the end of last year, and we see as the hottest topic in AI this year, is Agentic AI, which is, these intelligent systems underpinned by large language models that can think and decide and act. And it's that sort of level of application in a specific setting to do something useful, which I think people are now starting to realize that's how I unlock the value from this stuff within my business.
It's also moving it from fixed to fluid, isn't it? So it's more sort of, rather than having a rules-based engine that's just static, it's more the information that feeds back in, and then it becomes more of a dynamic conversation, and it evolves and moves on, which is the reason why we've sort of seen, if you're thinking about the conversations that we had in New York about, I'm going to use your phrase now, hindsight to foresight.
No, yeah,
That's
actually,
so
no, that was
much.
Paul's actually, that was genius.
Yeah, but it's sort of like, how do you make a TCA or a best execution something that is interactive and dynamic, as opposed to something that you get at the end?
Yeah.
So it's using a tangible use case in a more fluid manner that means that you can actually be much more productive with your time, which is where the sort of the use of the agents come in, because it's sort of, you can have an execution agent, you could have a routing agent, you could have an algo agent, you have a strategy agent. All of that is feeding information back to you in terms of your role as a trader to figure out how you could do a better job. And it's moving the information stream from the sell side more to the buy side.
Yeah.
So the buy sides are not dependent on the information that they get from the sell side. Bilateral liquidity streams, for example, they're going to need a lot more information from a lot more different sources in order to be able to make the decisions that are best for them. But it also offers a new opportunity for the sell side in terms of what you give that client can be much more customised and of value.
Absolutely, that customization is critical. So our TCA chatbot, the stateful chatbot that we built for transaction cost analysis, does exactly that. When you look at the wheels, the dashboard, the graphs and charts of a TCA platform, they're fixed. They're a rules-based structure that tells you want to look at the performance of your executing brokers. But what if I want to ask the system a question that's a grey question, somewhere between the black and white that's already been delivered? Well, actually, you can. With a dynamic chatbot, you can say, tell me who my 5 worst performing brokers were yesterday or last week. What were my 5 worst trades? And that will then retain the information. It's stateful, so you can build up a conversation about what's been going on. How could I have improved my performance on those trades? And that then starts to have a capability of giving you the foresight that Dan's talking about, rather than just T+1 hindsight. And that's critical.
And you could also have it in the back of a cab on the way to the meeting. You've got that instant information.
It's the greatest assistant we've ever had, isn't it? So going back to your point, which was people being concerned about their jobs. I think people have now realised that it is just the greatest assistant they've ever had, and you can have that decision assistance. It's a decision assistance tool. Ours certainly is, and it is about turning something which is static, which is maybe using siloed data from 3 months ago to decide which broker you're going to allocate the particular trade to a dynamic, bigger data set, usage of technology for that decision assistance, so you do have more time to look at that very complex trade or that massive in scale trade.
Exactly, it's a massive.
Yeah, exactly.
Game,
and then also we're talking about giving some kind of scoring on some of that liquidity as well.
It's almost industrialising what is in a trader's head.
Yeah.
So the trader will know, they'll have a gut feel, but you can actually now you don't have to have that particular trader in, because you can actually share the information more easily within the team, and you can collaborate more, back to the collaboration point.
Yeah.
Anabolic steroids for traders, that's what we're talking about.
And things can be done like that now, but as we were saying, I think the conversation is moving so quickly, I'm wondering that if in a year's time, if you're asked how you're still allocating trades and whether you're using technology or AI in any way, or if you're still using static data in a spreadsheet, there may be an incredulous response when you say that you aren't using technology
I'd
to
say
do
almost
this.
certainly.
Yeah,
on that
so
front.
people got to move.
Paul, I'm going to bring you back in there as well.
I get excited with how you can extrapolate these things into the future. A couple of things since the New York trip. We've seen a few of the large global consulting firms launch their operating systems or platforms for building AI agents. So they're all placing strategic bets. There are very good technology companies offering similar solutions. So it's let's have the toolkit available for people to build these agents. So that's point one. It's becoming easier. I've seen a demo yesterday of a no-code platform. You can build your sort of quarterbacker agent that chooses the next steps of things, and then sub-agents that do retrieval augmented generation or API calls, or now MCP calls, which is sort of APIs on sort of steroids, if you like. So that's moving quickly. That's great. But then, I get excited about the example Rebecca just mentioned there with the TCA. I can get that in the taxi on the way to the meeting. Yeah. Why do you have to ask, right? What's to stop an agent from understanding your calendar or your CRM tool and tracking your movements? And I know that's a bit big brother, but it proactively presenting information to you. If you're a salesperson, says here's some relevant news feeds or Twitter feeds or LinkedIn posts or otherwise on this individual that you're seeing in half an hour, I'm presenting it to you, or I'm presenting the TCA to the customer you're about to see, right? But rather than these things being, I ask you, you tell me, right? Let's let these things truly make our lives easier.
And this is what Paul's touching on there is really, really important, because this is talking about the technology as an operational process. The thing that sets Imandra, Biton and Sigma apart from that process is the analytics that we have underneath that operating process. You can't get the capabilities of Biton and Imandra and Sigma just by going to a consulting firm and saying, can you deliver me a system that can write me an agentic RAG API or do this process for me? Our analytics, our sentiment index, is very special. I mean, the IP around the new sentiment index, where it's able to re-rank, take all of the news and unstructured data that it's able to grab hold of, re-rank it in a vector space, and then say, this is very relevant, this is salient, this happened a long time ago, even though it's relevant, it doesn't quite have as much impact. And now what you can see is, as of today, for instance, with Apple diving, you can see the sentiment index and how the market has responded to sentiment. That, even 2 months ago, was practically impossible.
And it's also part of a wider shift in how markets are going to operate. So the more bilateral liquidity streams, the more you're away from a central limit order book. Actually, the more agents that are involved, the more automation that we see in trading, the multi-asset, all of this is painting a very different picture of, if you haven't got the technology, you don't have the insight.
And take that point, Rebecca, about sentiment to what you've just talked about, where in actual fact, the unstructured data within a firm, we pride ourselves not on the public data, but on the private data we can consume as well. Take all of the unstructured data within a firm, and now I'll give you what the RFQ sentiment is for your order flow. So when I go to deliver an indication of interest, who do I actually want to go to? Who performs well for me? What's the sentiment of those executing brokers from my TCA platform? I can start to get what you call fuzzy data structured in a way that actually delivers intelligent information to people, and they can execute from it.
It's the context, isn't it, to the data in a way that we never had access to before.
Yeah. So here's something that's been bothering me a little bit about this over the last couple of months, since I did another interview with someone else who talked about productivity. You know, what we're really talking about, the crux of the matter here with AI, is the increase in opportunities of productivity. And when we're talking about efficiency, productivity, augmenting the human, et cetera, it all comes down to this generational opportunity we've got now with AI. Rewind a few years ago, we were saying this generational opportunity with the internet of creating this sort of thing, but we've seen next to zero increase in productivity. So again, my concern sometimes about AI is that we've got all this opportunity to do it, and it just means people work a little bit less and get the same output from what they were doing, which would be a massive shot in your own foot around the capability of what we've got here. So how do we avoid that? How do we get around that sort of problem, and how can we make sure that this generational opportunity within this space doesn't become something that just makes everyone's jobs a little bit easier and still done at the same sort of level, but actually can massively increase it?
actually having jobs a little bit easier might not be a bad thing given the level of stress that we have in our industry. And you're also talking about a market that's heading towards 24/7. So like the idea that we could slow down.
Yeah, the delta of that risk is not changing much. It's about 2%. I mean, it's just don't think that's. I don't think the outcome that can be an outcome. I think the risk of that sort of being a non-event, I think it's.
I think if we look at the next generation and perhaps maybe even a generation after that, but if certainly the next generation of young people coming through school and into university right now, they think nothing of leaning into AI, whether it's ChatGPT or Perplexity or whichever open source or my
11-year-old was reading a book and saying she's putting it into her Snapchat the other day to finish reading it.
Look at our generation and wonder why on earth we still used pens, why on earth we still crafted material to actually deliver to somebody. Now, what you shouldn't do is abuse and misuse AI so that you try and deliver something that is clearly AI developed as your own tone of voice and not your own works. Actually, there's a real crass way of getting bad content from large language models and from artificial intelligence systems. But there's a way of using your intelligence with those to support your productivity and get faster, and there is in Silicon Valley now an absolute drive for there's almost a badge of honor for firms to have as few people as possible because they're leaning into all forms of AI for content delivery, for whether it's for board minutes, for board meetings and something recording you, whether it's production of presentations, whether it's code writing and code testing and all sorts of forms of support to massively boost productivity. It doesn't get rid of people.
Well, I was going to say, because the important point, as you just noted there, is that there are going to be new roles.
Yeah.
And I think, and we go back, it's the same thing. When we had automation of equity trading, it was like there was going to be nobody on the trading floor. There was going to be 2 men and a dog. One man to do the trading and the other one to look after the dog who was protecting the man. It didn't happen. Look at, our trading floors are not empty.
Yeah.
And we've got completely different roles in terms of data analytics and,
I agree.
quants. It's another way
evolution,
it's another evolution. Yeah. But I think that, again, it's incumbent on all of us to learn, because you're right. There's a huge sort of push externally now that I don't think we've had in our industry before. That we had a few years ago at Trade Tech. I think it was sort of like, Google and Amazon were going to take over and never quite did. But they are really pushing at the door now. Yeah. And I think this is where actually, because we have an industry that does operate slightly differently. It is increasingly 24/7. It's very news and sentiment focused, but it's also a people and relationship business. So it's that culmination of the two that I think actually, like these guys with their sort of smaller niche products, have a big role to play in how this whole workflow process changes.
It's also very risk averse because you can't make mistakes. It's too much at stake.
Well, this sort of becomes the issue around it, doesn't it?
It has to be an ultra low risk way of implementing these things.
It does this sort of paradigm shift in the way people work with AI, the way AI building is done. You can read prompts, right? It was something we said at the Fix event. Like you can actually read these prompts if you sit in a control function. That's interesting, especially if you can't read code. But what I think is interesting is for people that want to make an investment in AI, they have to think, in my view, differently about building a business case in the way in which they may otherwise build a business case for hiring another person or entering a new market or designing a new algo or something like that, because they're more transactional in nature. This is a bit more about horizon scanning. And if, using Rebecca's example around the beginning of electronic trading, right, if you couldn't foresee a business case for the need for data scientists and analytics, and you didn't make that decision, well, you wouldn't exist today if you didn't have that in the business, right? So if you have a strong enough view that AI is here to stay, then your business planning around that needs to take that long-term view into account.
So let's come back to some of these challenges, these hurdles that stand in the way. You touched on it there, Dan, when you were talking about being a risk-averse industry. Rebecca, I know you've been talking about regulators getting involved at pace alongside technology teams and businesses getting involved at pace. This is an industry that can't be approximately right. This is an industry that can't have hallucinations, etc., and that will be one of the things that holds people back a little bit until they can get really comfortable with how. And I guess it comes back down to the human working alongside the machine and
but
getting the best
of that together. I think
also
it goes back to the culture. You know, you say, you know, we're risk averse.
Yeah.
But we do have to get into a culture of learning to fail quickly and trying things out, but trying things out in a safe environment. So you don't necessarily have it exposed, but you need to trial things and see what works, see what doesn't, incorporating it within your workflow. And that's where I think some of the governance frameworks that are going to come out and people are starting to talk about it. How can you safely play and then implement, which is sort of, you know, and as the cost of compute does start coming down and you can start implementing smaller opportunities within the workflow process, then it doesn't necessarily have to be a multi-million-pound shift overnight where somebody's actually pulling the lever.
That's also why, going back to the previous conversation, why we're partnering with bigger firms and who are already part of the infrastructure with just an API. That's a way of reducing risk. It's, you know, you can just plug into us. It's very straightforward. It's not going to affect your route to the broker or anything. So that's why we're ultra low risk. And that's why forward-looking firms are opening up their ecosystems like Verti.
If I'm precise, we're not a risk-averse industry. We're a risk-taking industry.
Okay, true.
And the thing that we don't like in our risk-taking industry is when risk is not quantified. And we can't qualify that risk in terms of the impact on balance sheet or credit or liquidity or whatever other risk type that we look at. So where you have a system that has the potential for hallucinations and bias, which are unqualified in the actual action that could be taken because of that, that is a very dangerous and very scary place for regulators to find themselves. So what we've got to do is ensure we put the guardrails around the use of that AI, whether it's humans in the loop to make sure that the risk is qualified before it's executed, or whether it's that we have an agent in our system, in our agentic model, which is a fact-checking agent. We'd still, at the end of that process, say the human should be kept in the loop. Absolutely. In terms of making a decision to execute on the insights that we've provided. But fundamentally, this is about trying to quantify the risks that come through the systems that we build to give those firms confidence that they're not going to be taken to the cleaners and actually end up with a regulatory slap on the wrist.
That's, I guess, a segue for me to talk about neurosymbolic AI for a moment. Not many people talk about neurosymbolic as much as they do agentic AI, but what we mean by that is the fusion of large language models, probabilistic techniques, with symbolic techniques for analyzing, say, code or complex systems. And with this type of solution, you can add transparency and explainability to complex systems. So as people build out these agentic frameworks, using symbolic-based systems as well can help solve some of these problems around things like guardrails, decision-making process in kind of a critical setting.
Because you don't want to be without the experimentation.
Well, this
that's the beauty of it. But it's sort of like, at what point do you draw the line? So you have got the levels of control. So you almost want mass experiment here, but as you get closer to business critical, then you have greater controls over it, rather than just going, no, we're not going to do anything.
And Rebecca, don't forget, you and I have talked about this. But let's go back in time to the 70s and even before that we were using algorithms. Algorithms are a deterministic artificial intelligence system, but you put the same data in and get the same results out of it. We've been using guardrails around algo trading for a long time. What we're scared of, and rightly do worry about, is leaving a probabilistic system to come up with new trading ideas that we perhaps hadn't even thought of as humans, and it starts to execute.
Yeah, and we've just left the on switch.
Oh my word, that is scary. And the reason, it's the regulators, rightly, who are worried about that sort of thing. But as one of the participants in New York said, but actually, if you put a human in the loop and leave a probabilistic system to come up with new trading ideas, to present them to me, to allow me to put it through our risk system and make a decision on whether that is a good
idea,
trading strategy or not, actually, that's a really powerful new technique that we've suddenly started to think about, that you can use this concept to scan the data, and rather than it being maybe binary, and I'm very cautious about what I'm about to say, but maybe being binary, this is a good one, this isn't a good one, it does that sort of fuzzy logic assessment that says, this seems like a new path towards a trading strategy, have a look at this. Yeah. That's a different way, opening up ideas for people that they probably wouldn't have had. Yeah.
I was talking to somebody recently where they were saying, actually, because of the Trump tariffs, because of everything that's going on in the world, actually the old models aren't working as well as they should, because all of a sudden you've got events that, guess what, this has not happened before. So it's about the ability to actually take a greater range of information into your decision-making process to go, okay, so in this scenario, what would you do? Yeah. And I think that's really the difference.
I wonder if humans are dealing with these scenarios as well as they would normally operate, given the unpredictable nature of the markets over recent weeks.
Yeah, and political bias of the person as well, because it's
precisely that. It has to be a fair debate, but to compare the humans to the machines.
Yeah.
We've taken a variational autoencoder and looked at a vast amount of data with one of our customers and looked at behavioral analytics. And we can find trading signals in the behavioral analytics because of the human activity and what looks like a chaotic set of data points. Actually, when you use artificial intelligence techniques around similar to neural networks, you can see that there are combinations of the data points that lead the market in certain ways. And it's absolutely fascinating. There's no way on this planet that a human would have ever been able to scan that amount of seemingly unconnected data and come up with something which is actually a trading signal.
Yeah, it's incredible, and we could be talking about this for a long, long time. And it definitely needs another part 2 and 3. So I'm going to finish now by just shooting around as we did before we came on, just to sort of say, look, if you can have a takeaway from this for something, for people who are watching this wherever they may be, and something to think about within this sort of subject, something just to sort of ponder over, muse over. What would you want that sort of impression to be for people?
It's not too late to start learning. Yeah. I've been amazed how much I've learned in the last couple of years just on this topic, and I think there's
and you can learn at a pace as well, can't you? That's the other side of it. It doesn't need to be years of investment. You can become, by nature of the actual topic, you can become very expert very quickly if you're there and you invest the time into it and play around with it. And I think that's what we're seeing, a lot of people innovating, experimenting, and doing some really cool things with it.
Get learning,
or die trying.
Probably second that, really, just don't hesitate. You need to start making the move now, because as I said earlier, it might be a little bit hard to defend some of your functions, the way you operate in a year's time, because things are moving that rapidly. So you really need to be able to back yourself up with that technology and usage of that technology.
Well, it's incredible to think that it's even a year's time. When we think to you guys and having that conversation 2 months ago and thinking about how things have gone, we joked about it beforehand about how fast life is moving at the moment. Full stop. It is a year's a long time in AI, isn't it?
It certainly is.
Cool.
Similar. Keep reading. Have a look and a play at all these tools that keep on becoming available. My favorite one from earlier in the year was Google's Notebook LM. I use it all the time. It's great. I just had a play and I was like, wow. We've recently launched a plugin for developers to analyze their code using neurosymbolic AI. It's based on an agentic framework that we've built. And these things, if you're a developer, have a play with that. If you're a non-developer, have a play with something like Google's Notebook LM. But the more you have a play, the more it gets the creative juices flowing.
Absolutely. Do I have to keep reading that, or can I get some AI to read it for me? Few bullet point summary every morning.
I think
isn't what it used to. Andy, let's give
I'm continuing that theme. I've used this phrase repeatedly, it seems, this past few months since New York, which is lean into AI. Yeah. Allow it to help you increase your productivity, because sure enough, the young people coming out of school and out of university right now will not think a second about how they use AI. But use it, don't misuse it, don't become lazy and just think it can do your job. Yeah. If you use it in an elegant way, it really can enhance your productivity.
Fantastic. Well, look, I knew it was going to be good getting you guys together. Thanks so much for joining us and sharing the wisdom. The future's AI. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you on the next episode of FinTech Focus TV. Thanks a lot.